Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Yasmine Mohammed, who is an activist and the author of Unveiled, How the West Empowers Radical Muslims. In this conversation, we speak about her life growing up within a Muslim community in Canada and then being forcibly married to an Al-Qaeda agent and then escaping that religion and going on to rebuild her life and now to support women specifically who are fleeing or who have fled oppressive Islamic situations. We also talk about Islam's encroachment into the West and the West's inability or refusal to resist the extreme misogyny that lives and breathes within Islamic communities. You can find her work via the links below, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating. Without further ado, here is Yasmine Mohammed. So where does your story begin? How did you begin speaking out, and why?
Well, I grew up in a very religious home, a religious Muslim home. My mom was the second wife to an Egyptian man. Um, and
Second wife is in like concurrently or sequentially?
yeah, so in Islam, a man can marry up to four wives. So yes, she was his second concurrent wife. Um, and so it's just a lot of a lot of issues that come with that, right? So the first wife is the legal wife, and then the second wife is like second in the hierarchy. And because in Canada you can't have more than one legal marriage, my mom didn't have any legal protections. So she didn't get to like own the house with him, or, when they eventually got divorced, she wasn't entitled to anything, that kind of thing. But anyway, that was just to sort of explain to you how religious the home was that I was brought up in, that they, were okay with breaking the law of the land that we were living in, because they felt that this was Islamic law was it took precedent, right? And according to Islamic law, he can have up to four wives, so it didn't matter what the Canadian laws said.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came into our lives, I was about 6 years old, and suddenly everything changed, right? My mom was put in hijab, me and my sister were put in hijab. Suddenly we had to pray 5 times a day. We had to memorize Quran so that we could learn to pray 5 times a day. Music was haram. Haram means forbidden, Islamically forbidden. So everything fun was haram, right? Birthdays are haram, riding your bike is haram, swimming is haram, having non-Muslim friends is haram. Like everything that I was looking forward to at that point in my life was, riding a two-wheeler, getting to go to a sleepover birthday party. Like all of these things were just completely just yanked away from me as a child. And I resented him. I was unhappy and I was angry, and I wanted my mom to snap out of it and to go back to who she was before this man entered our lives. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. My mom became much more and more religious, and
Why do
because
you
I
think why do you
was,
think that was? What was she looking for, if you don't mind me asking?
well, my mom and my dad, when their relationship fell apart, she was looking for community. She was looking for a support system. And she went to the mosque not looking for religion. She wasn't really, well, she wasn't religious at all at that point, but she was just looking for community and support. And what she was told in this religion was that the reason why things had gone so wrong in her life is because she wasn't practicing enough. She wasn't a good enough Muslim.
Hmm.
She didn't have enough faith. And So that's why um, she decided to just become, you know, a born again Muslim, really, is what I call her. So if you can, imagine what a born again Christian is like, that was what my mom was like, just like fully all in, complete zealot. And she thought that this was going to be the answer to everything because her heart was broken with the divorce from my dad. And she was living in a new country and felt alone. And she was unhappy. And she just felt like this was going to be the answer to everything if she would just be religious enough. And if we would be religious enough. So we had to really, um, like she became an Islamic scholar. She started going to Al-Azhar University, got her master's degree in Islamic studies, became the head of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school. And then we had to be, as her children, we had to be, model Muslims
Hmm.
because otherwise it would make her look bad and dishonor her and everything. So,
So in this religion, she had a vehicle for her ambition, which was to reify the religion. So she could still move up the ranks in some capacity as a professor and gain status. And so,
there's no ranks or status. As a woman, there's very few roles that you can do outside of the home, and one of them is a teacher. So she was a teacher, which is a very approved feminine, like female role. Um, so really that's, she's a teacher.
but if she went
There
into
was
like
no ranking as far
astrophysics
as
or something like that, as long as she's in the capacity of education, then she's allowed to exercise
well,
her.
that depends. That depends on the family and how conservative they are. And um, yeah, that would depend.
Hmm.
But as far as when you're doing things fi sabilillah, you're doing things for Allah, for the religion, for the for the purposes of um to please Allah, then you're allowed to do more things than you would if you were doing them for any other reason.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How did she conceptualize what a woman is, or how did you learn what a woman is within Islam from her? I'm not a scholar of Islam, and what I
Hmm.
see of it is I don't know if misogyny is the right word or derogatory towards women, but women are certainly defined as second class. So what
Hmm.
is there like a trade-off that they're kind of cut off from, you know, certain respect and certain status, but they are also enshrined in a way or respected in their own domain? Is there like a place where they are honored?
Well, there's certain hadith, which is like Islamic scriptures that really outline specifically the role of a woman and the role of a man. And there's a hadith that describes in detail why women are less intelligent than men. And there's other hadith that describe why women could never be in any positions of leadership. So, you understand from the beginning, you understand that you are subservient, you are less than, you are second class to men, right? It's in the Quran, it tells men that if they fear arrogance or disobedience from their wives, then they're to beat them, right? Again, there's a hadith that go on about how men are basically women are their property. So when it comes to um, consent, for example, there's no concept of consent because you are owned by him. You are his.
Hmm.
And so, there's lots and lots and lots and lots of examples like that that basically reiterate and just constantly solidify this idea for you as a girl that you are less than.
Hmm.
And my mom didn't grow up in that world, though. My mom grew up in a very secular, open-minded, liberal family in Egypt. And
Hmm.
she felt that part of her penance for the life of sin and worldliness that she lived before was that she had to become super religious now and to make us super religious now to make up for her past sins, right? Because
Hmm.
she used to wear mini skirts and she didn't wear hijab and she had boyfriends and, whatever, all of the, she just lived like a normal life of a woman. Um, and so that's why she became such a zealot. Like she just really believed that she needed to make up for these past sins. Under normal circumstance, like generally, like for me, for example, when I asked if I would ever be able to go to university, like of course, everybody's talking about going to college after high school. My mom laughed at me and was like, "Are you ridiculous? Like, what would you need to go to university for? You think,
Hmm.
what are you going to do? Get a job? Like you don't, no, of course not. You're going to get married and you're going to make babies. That's your role. That is the greatest honor for a woman. That is your position in this world is to serve your husband and to make more Muslims. That's your goal.
Hmm.
Um, so that's like the general message that women are generally told.
Hmm.
But there are, of course, some women that push the envelope, or they come from families um, where they're allowed to go to university or they're allowed to get jobs. Like it's a spectrum, right? So the religion teaches one thing, but that doesn't mean that everybody is gonna be following it very strictly and
Hmm.
verbatim.
Hmm.
Um, so.
Were you able to
Yeah.
circulate among different Muslim communities and find different levels of restraint, restriction, and freedom?
Well, kind of. I mean, I would know other people who were not nearly as strict as my family, but we weren't allowed to interact with them.
Oh.
Yeah, they were considered, like they weren't Muslim enough, so
Hmm.
they were looked
Is,
down
is
upon.
is there a state of being Muslim enough aside from being Muhammad himself?
Yeah, I mean, that's the great question. That's the thing that you're always striving for. And really, people police each other more than they police themselves.
Hmm.
So they're constantly looking at each other and each other's families, and it's a cult mentality. Like you have to think of it as like um, uh, I don't know. Yeah, basically a cult. Like everybody's busy policing each other and looking at each other. And so that's what makes people worried. Like my mom used to, if I'd say something like, if I wanted to start wearing pants or something instead, can I stop? Can I wear pants instead of skirts all the time? She'd say something like, what will the people say? Which I
Hmm.
always thought was so funny, like the people, as if it was going to be on the front page of the newspaper, Yasmin wore pants. Like, who cares? Like nobody, but it was just this constant fear of what will the people say, and it keeps everybody in line because it's very like the concept of honor is very important, family honor, and this is why you hear about honor violence and honor killings are
Yeah.
unfortunately very common. It's because of this idea of to be to be honorable, the women in the family have to all be wearing hijab, they all have to be in the home, they all have to keep their voices low. Honor is always the woman's responsibility, right?
Hmm.
The men in the family or the boys in the family, they can go out and they can do whatever they want to do. Nobody really talks about them. it's your typical sexist, misogynist, if you think back to like the 50s in America or something, right?
Hmm.
If the girl had a boyfriend, everybody would have something to say about that, but nobody would have a word to say about the boy that she's dating, right? Like that's fine.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like that, but of course on steroids.
What does this do to, I mean, from your perspective and experience, what does this do to a man's psychology? Does it, from your perspective, stunt his growth to not have an equal partner in his life, to not have certain restrictions put on him? Do, are there good examples of it creating good men, or is it largely creating irresponsibility in the psychology of the males?
Yeah, it absolutely creates narcissistic males. There's no doubt about that. That have zero accountability, that can just do whatever they want. Whatever it is that they do is completely celebrated. Men have their own issues too if they don't fit the mold. So if they don't fit that toxic masculine mold, then they are berated by the other men in the community.
If they're not
So my brother,
gentle
for
enough,
example,
or
if they're
respect
not
women too
gentle,
much, if they're not gentle enough or
if
respect women too much, or then they're
they're
forced
not
out.
aggressive enough,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's a it's a concept. It's a word. It's ghira, which kind of loosely gets translated into jealousy, but that's not quite the right word. But when a woman, whether it's his mother, his sister, his wife, whatever, somebody in his family, if there's a woman in his family that is viewed as being, for example, too Western enough, it is the man in the family that is damned. He's the one that is like, oh my God, he can't keep his woman in line. He's too weak.
Hmm.
He's a cuck. He's a this. He's a that. And so he's the one that gets attacked. And so in turn, that's why the the violence against women happens because he is reacting to that, like, oh, all of my friends are talking about you, or everyone in the community is talking about you, so I have
Yeah.
to now assert my aggressive male dominance through some sort of violence. But I want to talk a little bit about, just out of fairness here, people like my brother who, rather than play sports, he'd watch like the Nature Channel or Star Trek or something. Like he was not at all the stereotypical toxic male that was celebrated in this community. And my mom would constantly be going on about how he was gay and this and that, and just like berating him,
Hmm.
insulting him. You're so effeminate, da 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 da. And I was always the kind of person who was questioning and pushing, and my mom would berate him and be like, "You can't even keep your sister in line," you know. And so he was getting that kind of messaging, which was that unless you're going to be an
Hmm.
aggressive, toxic male, there's something wrong with you. So it pushes men into that direction, pushes boys into that direction. So when you talk about how it hurts them, I think that's the first way that it hurts them, is it encourages in them um, aggression towards women. And when you have a religion that
Hmm.
tells men to beat their wives, that's what you're creating here, right? You're creating that hierarchy. You're not saying you guys are an equal relationship and you help each other and you work together and you support each other. No, you're saying like she is your property, she is your thing. If she doesn't listen to you, you beat her. Basically, like the way an abusive person would treat a dog or something, right?
Hmm.
So that's the way. So it's not healthy for anybody.
Yeah.
This is not healthy for human flourishing in the least.
It seems adapted to a certain climate where harsh conditions, in order to survive, you have to be very tribal. Resources are slim, and so women are a resource too, and men need to
Yes.
aggressively pursue survival at all costs, survival of their tribe and their family. But when it's supplanted from, a different time or a different place to
Hmm.
Canada, of all places, to an area of superabundance or post scarcity world, it seems very alien. And
Hmm.
I don't know if I want to be humble enough to say that perhaps thinking of it as backwards or as ancient is not the right way to respect it because of its power, and not respect it because I agree with it at all, but to understand it as something that keeps on perpetuating itself even within Western liberal democracies. It can come over, and this way of thinking can continually perpetuate. So like it works for certain people, right? It worked for your mother. For one reason or another, we can study the psychology, but it works enough that it keeps on perpetuating itself aggressively.
Perhaps, but I would argue that the reason why it works so well is fear. Everybody
Okay.
is controlled by fear. Obviously, the women are controlled by fear, men are controlled by fear. I mean, in Islam,
Guilt. Yeah.
if you leave the religion, you are to be killed, right? You're given 3 days to repent and then you're to be killed. So you, everything is fear,
Okay.
right? Like, yeah, exactly. Like I think you said, like a cult. Um, you are too scared to step out of line. Now, whether it's you're scared of what's going to happen to you here on Earth, as far as, what people are going to find out what happened and how they're going to react to that, or your fear of hellfire and for eternity.
Hmm.
So it's just constant fear. And that keeps people in line. And, it's very successful.
Hmm. Well, I mean, you obviously broke out of it. Maybe there was a disposition that you had or you had experienced before it, so you had context that there was a place for you to go. From your own experience, how did you leave and deal with the fear?
Well, like I mentioned, I was the kind of person who was always asking questions, who was always pushing. And so my mom kind of got sick and tired of me. And she eventually forced me into a marriage with a terrorist, a member of Al Qaeda. And she said, "This man will finally be strong enough to control you."
Huh.
And she wasn't wrong. It worked, of course, in the beginning. Covered head to toe in black niqab, not allowed to leave the house, getting beaten if I ever,
Jeez.
opened my mouth, getting beaten if he didn't like the dinner I'd made, or, getting beaten because he was in a bad mood, whatever. So that was my life. And then I ended up having a daughter with him. And that was the catalyst for me. That was the moment because it was actually a precise moment when him and my mom were talking about taking my daughter to Egypt to have female genital mutilation performed on her. And I realized this child is going to have an even worse life than I did.
Hmm.
Like, if I don't get her out of here. So, what you say is true in that I had this context of what life was like prior to Islam, basically. And I always was thinking of like, oh, one day I'll be free. One day I'll get out of here. One day I'll go back to the way things were. But the one day never really happens, and then you just keep moving forward and forward and forward. And then
Hmm.
when I had my daughter and I realized like that one day, like it's slipping away. Like if I don't get out of here, not only will that one day never happen for me, more importantly, it's never going to happen for her. And it's going to be worse because her father was talking about going to Peshawar and, he just wanted to die as a martyr, right? Like that was just his goal.
Hmm.
And so I knew I had to get my daughter out of there, and I knew I had to get out of there. And so it wasn't that I wasn't afraid. I was very afraid. I mean, this guy is a member of Al Qaeda. His friends are everywhere. And my
You knew
mom
that?
threatened to kill me.
Wait, what?
Yes, I did know
Okay.
that because the CSIS, who are the Canadian CIA, essentially, they contacted me. It's a long, complicated story. My
Yeah.
book is behind me there, unveiled, that goes in detail. Very long and complicated, but the short version is I was able to get away from him and away from my mom. And I felt fear the whole time. But it's kind of like if you think of what's happening in Iran right now, with the IRGC standing with their guns, and still you see Iranian women taking off their hijabs and burning them in the streets.
Hmm.
And you realize there's a point where the rage overcomes the fear. And that's where I was. I was not in a lucid, I wasn't planning things. I was not like uh, in any way
Jailbreak. Yeah.
mentally prepared. Yeah, it was survival. It was just like I would have taken my daughter and jumped out of that window. And if we both died, so be it. Like I was just not thinking about it. I just needed to get out of that house. I needed to get away from him. I needed to get away from my mom. I needed to get away from this world. It was like, your survival instinct. I think it's different for when you become a parent. You I mean, you have a survival instinct to protect yourself, but when it comes to your kid, it just something else happens. Like it's like Mama Bear kicked in, and I was like, she will not live this life. I will
Hmm.
get her out of here. And thankfully, through like I say, a very long series of complicated events and, the flap of a butterfly's wing somewhere, I
Yeah.
was able to get out.
Yeah. Well, do you know the suicide rates in Islamic communities? Because living under this amount of pressure seems like one would, certain psychologies wouldn't be able to handle it and off themselves, but there
Yeah.
might be a countervailing, the story of hellfire countervails that
Yep.
impulse.
Yeah. Well, committing suicide is haram.
Yeah, well,
Yet,
yeah.
yet another haram. So, I tell the story in my book how when I was 14, I wanted, I took a handful of Advils. I wanted to die, but I was also so scared of
Yeah.
dying because I knew that then I would go to hell, or I believed that then I would go to hell for eternity. And so you're just like caught in between this paradox that there's
Yeah.
like no escape. But when suicides happen in the Muslim majority world, they're not usually attributed to suicide. They'll say oh, it was accidental death, things like that. Like women set themselves on fire. This is a common thing. They will drape themselves in like lighter fluid, set themselves on fire, and they'll say, oh, it was an accidental death. They, they're,
Hmm.
it's, yeah, there's, you must be aware with like fight or flight. There's fight, flight, or freeze. And a lot of women in these societies, and you'll hear like Ayan Hirsi Ali was on Joe Rogan, and it was crazy to me because she told the exact same story that had happened to me. It was so weird. But
Hmm.
she talked about how when she was a teenager and she was like complaining to her friends and complaining to her mom, and she was just like frustrated with the life of women under Islam. And the older women, like her aunts and stuff, they said to her, like in a wise voice, like, we all went through that stage. Like, you eventually have to stop fighting. There's nothing, you won't win, you won't change anything.
Hmm.
So in order to be happy, or in order to be satisfied, or, not suicidal and depressed, you have to just accept, you have to submit, which is essentially the definition of the word Islam. You
Hmm.
have to submit and you have to just accept it. So you have to let the cement entomb you and just stop fighting. And I was told the same thing. Like, we often get told that you do reach a point where you stop resisting. And I did stop resisting. When I first married that man that they made me marry, there was nothing left of me. I had
Hmm.
not even a shadow of my former self. I
Yeah.
completely stopped resisting. I became the cyborg that I was supposed to be, right? Just the submissive wife that cooked and cleaned, and that's it. Didn't ask for anything, just shut her mouth and did what she was told. But having my daughter really
Hmm.
um, snapped me out of it.
Uh, this is it's painful to hear, and so I want to approach it very carefully. But it's painful to hear that your motherly impulse brings you on a journey away from that and towards yourself. But your mother, presumably the same kind of impulse, is threatening to kill you, is threatening to mutilate your child. Like, how do you that the duality there? How do you go through a process of healing to reconcile your mother's
Well,
path?
strangely, um, when I realized how much I loved my daughter and how much I would do anything to protect her when she was like minutes old, and I realized she didn't have to do anything for me to love her. She didn't have to be anything for me to love her. I just really, really loved her. And that was an epiphany, but it was also healing in a sort of way because I realized my mom actually just never loved me. Like, there was nothing I could have done or said
Uh,
or been. Up until then, I would have done anything to make her proud of me, to feel love from her. And I was doing everything. I married the man she made me marry. He was beating me. He was raping me. I was, imprisoned in the house. I took it to the limit of what a good Muslim was. I did everything that you demanded of me, and it still wasn't enough. And that was the moment when I realized it will never be enough. There's nothing that I can do about this. This is not my fault. It's not my fault that she doesn't love me. This is not a flaw in me. And so it was incredibly sad, of course, um, but also freeing in a way because it made me realize, like, well, what am I doing then? Why
yeah.
am I sacrificing my own happiness for hers when hers is it's a black hole. It will never happen. And so it gave me the freedom, I guess, to say, I give up. I'm done here.
Mm.
I'm never going to make you happy. I'm never going to make you love me. So I might as well find my own happiness and my own love.
Yeah. So you said that by the time you got married, you had been wiped out and you were just an NPC. You were just a automaton, just filling the role that this religion has engraved for you. What was what, I assume it can probably be a little rocky to go from being so tightly controlled to just kind of be thrown into the whatever world of modernity. Like, where did you land, and what did you find?
Man,
What kind of pieces did you have to pick up?
yeah, every piece. I mean, it's just, um, It's really, really hard to explain, but I'll try my hardest. It's with when you're a Muslim, every single aspect of your life is mapped out, you know, like how you like is what like how you when you wake up in the morning, what clothes to wear, how to put your slippers on, how to go to the bathroom, how to drink your water, how to cut your toenails, everything.
Hmm.
Everything is mapped out. There's very minimal opportunity to think. You just do. You just do as you're told. And so when that whole structure falls, like when you're like, okay, I'm not going to be a Muslim anymore, it's like, well, then what am I?
Yeah.
Well, then who am I? Then how do I, what clothes do I wear? What food do I eat? Like what, you don't know anything. You don't know anything. And it's the simple things like knowing, um, like making choices, making basic decisions was overwhelming, was so difficult. I didn't know how to weigh things. Like I didn't know pros and cons. Like how do I make a decision when I've never made a decision in my life before? So suddenly it's like you have to figure out where to live, right? And you have to make these decisions about like where's the grocery store and where's the daycare center and where's your university and like you have to think of is it a safe area, blah blah blah. There's so many things. I had zero idea what I was doing. I just kept on making mistakes and learning mistakes and learning mistakes and learning.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and then that's just the physical life part of things. The internal part of who you are too.
Yeah.
You have to completely rebuild. And not just rebuild, build, because I didn't even get to build it the first time. So you have to just you have all of these beliefs and biases and ideas and opinions, but are they yours? Where
Hmm.
did this come from? Why do I think that? And oh man, it's just
Wow.
a constant like thinking that you're okay and that you've moved forward and then something triggers you and then you realize, oh my God, that was still lurking in there and then you have to
Yeah.
clean that bit out and it's just
Hmm.
it's a long, long, difficult process.
How old were
And
you when
it's
you left?
I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah. 25, 20, 26 when
Okay.
I was like completely in the basement apartment with just me and my daughter and cut off. I was 26. Yeah.
Wow. Was there any mentorship or support for you? Or did
Oh
you find
no,
it like look on the internet and find a podcast or like
there
any
was no
voice?
internet. This was the 90s. This was pre any kind of social media or support like that at all. Um, no, there were my friends, of course, that I made and because I got student loans. That's how I
Okay.
was able to get the apartment. Um, well, it's not an apartment, it was a basement suite, but anyway, that's how I was able to get it. That's how I was able to go to university. And you know, it sorry, what was the question? I started
Oh,
thinking
just
about so
yeah,
many
just
other things.
yeah. Well, we can just concentrate on university. Were you able to? Where did your education stop, and how much did you have
Yeah,
to work to just get back into the education
good
mindset?
questions. Yeah. So these are really big questions because nothing is simple in
Yeah.
in my life. Nothing was simple. Um, but I did go to Islamic schools up until high school, where I was allowed to go to a public school because there were no high schools in my area. But my very first year of high school, I told my teacher, Mr. Fabro, about what was going on at home, about the abuse that was happening. Mr. Fabro wrote the foreword for my book, by
Hmm.
the way. And he alerted the police, and the police alerted child services. And basically, I got in a lot of trouble for going to the enemy, going to the non-Muslims, going to the non-believers and asking them for help from my Muslim family. And I was seen as like a rat within the mafia, you know, it was just like a
Hmm.
traitor. Um, and then the cherry on top is that the judge actually ruled that um, this was my family's cultural freedom to raise me the way they wanted to raise me. And so he wasn't going to protect me. So then it was not only was I a rat, but I was a stupid rat because look at you. You went through
Yeah.
all that to get the help of these non-Muslims, and look how they threw you back into the lion's den. They don't care about you, and you just made an idiot of yourself. And so I wasn't allowed to go back to school
Yeah.
because, of course, they have to keep me away from uh, trying to get out. And that was another example of where I completely submitted. Um, I had nothing else. You know, I took it all the way to the family court system to a judge and telling me, no, there's nothing we can do for you. And so I truly believed that this was Allah's will, and that if Allah wanted this, there was nothing I could do to
Oh,
change my
Jesus.
fate.
Yeah.
And so that was the first time I tried to commit suicide.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Um, we're going through so many different tangents. But I have
Yes.
another tangent for you. You described that moment where you realized that nothing you're ever going to do is going to award you mother's love.
Hmm.
If the one Almighty God, Allah, is allowing you to do this, or it's like the same matrix. Like, how do
Hmm.
you come to peace? I don't know. Isn't peace a big word in Islam? Um,
No, they just tell you it is.
oh,
That's
okay.
the propaganda, Benjamin.
Oh, okay. But what about your
Yeah.
relationship? If you do found your relationship on a religion, and there's the one Almighty God at the center of that religion, and then you get out of that religion, like what kind of realizations and what kind of rediscovering of
Well,
that?
I mean, there was no peace in that religion whatsoever. There was nothing but just fear and fire and brimstone. There was zero peace. And so when I left, even though I was terrified at the freedom, you know, because the way I described it to one of my friends was like, I'm in the middle of an ocean and there's no life raft, and I don't know which direction to go. Where is land? Which land am I aiming for? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then she said to me, but how exciting is that though? Because now you can go anywhere and you can do anything. And so she
Hmm.
helped me to turn around my thinking. But it is very, very scary, but it's also the cost of liberty. Like, oh my God, I would pay it 1,000 times over. I would do this again and again. Everything was worth it. You know, I was speaking to one of the women from my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds, was saying she escaped from Saudi Arabia and she was in Montreal. And she was saying, I asked her, I said, what's your favorite part? Like, what's the best part of being free? Because I'd never lived in Saudi Arabia. I'd never lived under Islamic law. I'd always lived in Canada my whole life. And so, you know, I was asking her, like, what's it like, you know, being in a free country now? And she said, the best part is waking up in the morning, putting on whatever clothes I want to wear, and opening the front door and walking out and going anywhere I want to go. And it was such a perfect response because it's the kind of thing that is everything. I felt every syllable of what she was saying to me. But at the same time, it's such a normal, everyday occurrence for most people that it wouldn't even cross their mind that that's a freedom. They wouldn't even think of that as a freedom. You
Hmm.
know, women in Iran that aren't allowed to ride their bikes or aren't allowed to sing, you wouldn't think of these things as freedoms. This is just normal life. But for us, every single aspect, everything we do is a constant gratitude for our freedom. Even now, decades later, I'll just stop and I'll have a moment and I'll be like, I get to have a dog because dogs are haram, right?
Hmm.
I get to, have my hair blowing in the wind. I get to be, in a pool swimming. I get to have the man that I wanted to marry, that I fell in love with, that I chose for myself. Like you can't stop feeling gratitude constantly for your freedom. And so, whatever price I had to pay to get here, and the price I had to pay for my daughters to not even know how lucky they are that they have their freedom, for me to look at them and know that they're never going to understand how I grew up. Like they can hear the stories, they can empathize, but they're never going to ever have to overcome any of these things. They're never going to really know. My God, like that's the ultimate like happy ending right there. Like this is
Hmm.
it. I have succeeded in my life, that I've stopped this cycle from touching my daughters.
Hmm. Kind of a higher level discussion based on your experience going to the family court system and then and then this common law says, well, we're a liberal society, so we're not going to tell your parents what to do. Like, obviously Sharia law can operate within a common law society, but common law society cannot operate within Sharia law. And so we come to the juncture that it looks like the UK is rapidly approaching, importing a lot
Mhm.
of Muslims from other countries. And then just a couple days ago, they've declared, this is so weird, they declared that extreme misogyny is terrorism,
Yeah.
or they want to. But at the same time, you're not supposed to, they will throw you in prison for criticizing Islam, which
Hmm.
in the way that you're describing it, is extremely misogynistic and up to and
100%.
including terroristic at the same time. So what's going on with these liberal societies trying to be so, is it like being so open-minded that your brain falls out? Like how
Yes.
do you resist this really intense religious programming that does not respect common law, but common law is forced to respect it?
Is it though? Is it forced to respect it?
Yeah. So how, yeah. Is it not? I
Yeah.
mean, it looks like
No, I don't think
that's
it is.
okay.
I don't think it is. I think that, well, I don't think that the judge should have said to my family, you're okay to abuse your daughter however you want because you happen to be Egyptian or Muslim or Arab. That's not okay. We don't have to respect barbaric acts just because of the ethnicity or the religion of the perpetrator, right?
Hmm.
When we talk about FGM that I was mentioning before, that's a huge problem in the UK, right? They only know it's a problem because of all the girls that are sent to Egypt or Somalia and then come back to the UK and there's complications and then their doctors notice what's going on. So they know that this is a real problem. Have they ever done anything about it? Have any of these parents ever been thrown in prison? No, nothing. They get a pamphlet that educates them. Hey, you know what? You really shouldn't chop off your daughter's clitoris with a razor blade. Like they needed a pamphlet. Like they didn't, like as if they just didn't know. that they're not supposed to do this. You know what I mean? There's no consequences to their actions. They continually, another thing that the UK has, mind blowing. They had to have a process for stopping girls that are being sent to Pakistan or Iraq or whatever off to get married. And so they started telling girls, take a spoon, put it in your underwear. So when you go through the metal detectors at the airport, the security guards will see a spoon in her underwear and they'll be like, whoa, what is that? That's weird. Aha, we've been trained to know that a spoon in the underwear means that she's going to be forced into a marriage. This is what the UK is doing. They are coming up with creative ways to, instead of, no, what you do is you prosecute these people. You know what I mean? In Italy, there was a an honor killing for a girl that had a boyfriend or something, and they murdered her, and then they ran off to Pakistan. Well, you know what the Italian government did? They chased them down. They chased them down in Pakistan and they brought them back and they put them in prison. So, you know what you're not going to see in Italy? You're not going to see the levels of honor violence and honor killing that you see in the UK. Because when it happens in the UK, they're like, oh, well, they're gone. Same, and not just the UK, right? I'm not picking on the UK right now. This is UK, Sweden, Germany, France, like Canada, America, you name it. This is, I mean, I'm going to mention Ayan Hirsi was talking about when she was speaking with police in Minnesota, and they said to her, "We cannot even begin to tell you how many girls we we assume are probably buried in backyards all around." They know this is happening, but they feel like, what are we going to do about it? Like they're not controlling the
Yeah.
situation. They're
Yeah.
feeling like Islamophobia is stopping them or whatever Rotherham gangs. Again, we're back to the UK. All
Yeah.
of these thousands of girls in rape gangs for years. Cops knew about it, journalists knew about it, politicians knew about it, and nobody could open their mouth because if you spoke about it, you were the one that was demonized. Because how dare you speak about Pakistani rapists, right?
Yeah.
It's not about protecting the girls, it's about protecting the
What?
religion, the
Why?
ethnicity, the I don't know what, right? They
It
don't
just
want to be
like
called bigots.
yeah. So I'm trying to be smart about this, but I have this persistent intrusive thought that seems kind of just low grade or low hanging fruit. But you described the way that men are shaped by this religion, being shamed to be cucks, right? Or being shamed to be weak, being shamed to be tolerant, being shamed to be gentle and kind and inquisitive. But then we're also seeing that those, the liberal men or men who grew up in a liberal society are losing the will to defend women, are being cucked by this stronger religion. So there's a balance between toxic masculinity and actually strong masculinity, and I think that there's a degradation in the West of men's ability to be protectors, to be strong, to be forceful, and to enact rules because they don't want to offend because they're so we're going like it seems like we could you brought up the 50s. I mean, maybe we could go back a little bit
Yeah.
towards where we had some sort of will. I mean, there's a balance, right? So
I do not disagree with you in the least. I completely see what you're saying and I completely hear what you're saying, and I feel the same frustration. Yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, we are looking not only see, this is what happens though. You
hmm,
know, let me talk to you about this friend of mine that was telling me about when she was in France and she was approached by a bunch of, she thinks probably Moroccan or Algerian men.
hmm,
And she was so scared. She thought, this is it. My life is over. Like and then the cops came and they, she ran to them And she went in the car, and as they were taking her to where she needed to go and talking to her about it, they were asking her what was going on and stuff. And then they said something along the lines of, you have to be careful with these men that are coming from other societies and stuff like that. And she started to defend them.
Hmm.
She started to say,
Yeah.
well, men can be assholes from any country. Right? And she's telling me this story now, like decades later. But the reason why she was telling me the story was to show me how twisted to the left her mind was when she was younger, that she was these cops are trying to defend her and protect her and give her some advice, and she's admonishing them for what she deemed as, oh, perhaps this could be racism right now.
Hmm.
And she forgot.
Yeah.
She forgot the moment ago when she was almost the victim of
Yeah.
these men. And she just like, nope, I have to get into the mode of like protecting them because
Yeah.
they are, sweet little brown men and they need to
Yeah.
be protected. And how dare we say anything bad about the noble savages?
Yeah.
So that's a problem. It makes the men feel quite often like, well, then I won't say anything. Well, then I won't get in your way. You know what I mean? Because they are not celebrated for it, they are not appreciated for it, they are instead admonished for it. And I hear many variations of this story over and over and over again. And
Hmm.
that has it has created an environment that is a perfect storm for these men to do what they want to do because there's no resistance. There's nothing in their way. And I'm not talking about just like average men, vigilantes on the streets. I'm talking about even the cops can't resist. Even the politicians can't resist. Like nobody can resist them because of this magical word of Islamophobia that
Yeah.
has like this, protects them in this like freaking invisibility cloak.
Yeah.
And so they can just do whatever they want to do.
Yeah. I don't know how to fix the problem at all, but that empathy trap that, I guess we kind of describe it as leftism or wokeness or whatever. Like there's a number of different ways of describing it, but it seems like the empathy is put on the out group rather than the in group because we're so scared
Yes.
of being racist or caring about our own society because we're free and we're open, we're liberal. So we're going to exude, and eventually these other groups will just see the light and kind of magically start treating us respectfully. And
It's
no force
suicide.
is going to have it. It is suicide. And you look at history, you look at the Crusades, you look at the Muslim incursion into Europe and Europe fighting back, and there's always been this tug of war. And I think that our guilt and our empathy is working to our disadvantage, and that it's always going to be a tug. It's historical. I mean, it's just as historical as what's going on in Israel and Palestine, but the European, and Western democracy, I think we get away from, I think we forget just how fragile that freedom is. Providing
Yes.
that limitless freedom is it's still happening within a bubble that's it does have regulations, is guarded. It feels very free comparatively, but it still has guardrails on it. And I think our generation, Gen X, we've just lost contact with just how fragile that is and how much it relies on certain limits. So getting
Hmm.
inspired to protect those limits requires us to
Hmm.
find the balance of placing our empathy with our group first in the proper
That's
way,
what,
but we're not allowed to do that because that's
yeah.
Nazi, right?
Yeah. And that's such a human response. Like that's such that's such a normal human response to do that. That's what we do. We protect our family first,
Yeah.
right? And or our neighborhood first. Like that's what you're supposed to do. But we are overriding our natural evolutionary need, we are overriding it because we are being told that this is what we need to do. And it is absolutely suicide. And what you say about us forgetting how fragile these freedoms are, that is not true for all Gen Xers. It's not true for me because
No.
I know
Yeah.
how fragile these freedoms are. I've
Yeah.
I've seen the other side.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Israel, like pre-October 7th, I would have conversations with like Israeli friends living in Tel Aviv, and they would say to me, "Oh, Yasmin, like you're this is a bit much. Like you sound like an alarmist now." Like they had no idea. They were just like living in La La Land. After October 7th, they now can see what I see, right? Now we're on the same page. Now they get it. Now we can have conversations because they recognize,
Yeah.
okay, this is a clear and present danger. But when when you have had the privilege of not knowing what the other side looks like,
Yeah.
then you get to live in ignorant bliss, you know?
Well,
But
yeah,
I
not
don't
even
get to
that,
live
but
there.
you forget, you lose contact with gratitude, and then you start to resent things. It seems like there's that slip from, living in the free society, and our free society producing a bunch of like very resentful babies, like trying to
Yes.
actively erode our freedoms because they want trigger
Yes.
words, they want more guardrails, they want to control everybody, so it's like a few generations slip, and it's not even like the vacuity of gratuity is one thing, but it turns into active resentment of the freedoms that you
Hmm.
have, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I
Yeah.
am seeing the same things that you're seeing, and it is absolutely terrifying and very, very frustrating.
I wanted to kind of try to restate what I said earlier about respecting Islam for its ability to reproduce, and kind of trying to understand it evolutionary and based on just human psychological principles. You you give me an insight into just how tight that is, how controlling it is, how tribal it is, and it's operating on the same human biological and psychological principles that we all operate on.
Yeah.
And you look at the liberal West, and we're trying to escape too far. We're going too far in the other direction, where we're trying to just, up to and including just like trying to escape from biology, and with
Yep.
the gender stuff, and like just kind of riding roughshod over reality in our quest for infinite freedom. So I don't know. I know that it's like, I'm not saying both sides, but they're both
Hmm.
imbalanced. They're
Hmm.
obviously imbalanced. And
Hmm.
I wonder if your work, well, what is your work? What is your organization? And I'm sure it's probably you're providing the services and the comradeship and the mentorship that you lacked when you got out.
Yes, absolutely. And I will talk about that in 1 second. I just want to go back to this imbalance that you were talking about because I agree with you and I do see that. But I will say the main difference is that within our liberal democracies, there is at least space for us to progress, to grow, to change, to adapt. Whereas within the Islamic
Mm,
Sharia,
yeah.
societies, there's none of that. So you're going to follow the same rules that were told to Muhammad 1400 years ago, the same stuff he heard in a cave is what people are going to be following in 2024.
Hmm.
And so there is no room for growth or evolution or adapting or thinking or progress. And so even though it looks like both are moving in the wrong direction. I think that, well, this one's stagnant. It's not moving,
Yeah.
first and
Yeah.
foremost. And
Well,
secondly,
it's
I
not.
think with
Well,
human beings,
it's stagnant, but it's malignant too because it keeps growing. And I'm sorry to use
yes,
that word, but
no,
it's
it's
frozen, but
perfect.
it's growing. So
Yes, no doubt. But I think human progress in general, there's a quote, which I can't remember it exactly right now, from F. Scott Fitzgerald in oh God, what's the name of the one and only book that he ever wrote? The Great
Oh, Great
Gatsby.
Gatsby. Well, you wrote one
Yeah,
other.
at the end of The Great Gatsby, he talks about how we are like ceaselessly, you know, like boats on the water. We move forward and then we move back. We move forward and we move back. But if you look at humanity at large, we are moving forward. And I think that we are in many ways rolling back in our humanity for a lot of reasons in our
Hmm.
society.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but I still believe that we have the potential to move forward and we will move forward and we will correct ourselves. I still believe in that. Um, and it could happen in the Muslim world too if they allowed for secularism, if they allowed for separation of mosque and state, and they allowed people the freedom to think and to choose, freedom of expression, freedom of belief, then things could be very different in those countries as well. But
Hmm.
the fact that everything is, like you say, completely
Hmm.
you
Can
know,
they afford, can
closed and
this,
malignant.
when this ideology is brought up to a state level, can they afford any wiggle room? When it's married to power, I don't know if they can afford any wiggle room.
No, I mean, look at Iran, look at Afghanistan, look at
Yeah.
Pakistan, look at there. No, there's absolutely zero wiggle room.
Hmm.
And
But
it's,
Egypt is able to pull off some amount.
yeah, yeah. So Egypt is considered a secular country. So they have Islamic laws, but they consider themselves to be a secular country. Now, I say that with air quotes because it's a joke, right? It's an
Hmm.
absolute joke. There's people that are being imprisoned for atheism. There's a woman that I just posted about before I started this conversation with you, a 22-year-old woman who has decided to take off her hijab. Her father and her brother tortured her and shaved her head and took her money and her laptop and her phone and everything. Um, this is what happens in one of the freer, more progressive Muslim countries, right? There's no such thing. Like
Hmm.
even Algeria, Lebanon, Tunisia, like they've all got horrific, horrific social problems. But compared to Afghanistan, they're doing okay. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's a spectrum, but it's certainly nowhere near a healthy society by any stretch of the imagination.
Hmm.
Now, going back to my organization, you're absolutely correct. That's what I do with Free Hearts, Free Minds. It was developed because I felt such empathy for people who were born and raised in Muslim societies. I was born and raised in Canada in a free secular country, and it was still so hard for me. So imagine people in those societies. And my heart also broke for gay people, for homosexuals in those countries because they get executed for being who they are.
Yeah.
And so I was feeling like I wanted to take all of the darkness and all of the things that had happened to me and somehow turn it into something positive. And so, like I mentioned to you, this happened to me in the 90s. There was no social media, there was no way to reach each other. But thankfully, there is now. So our organization's able to reach people all over the globe. We started off with focusing
Hmm.
only on people in Muslim majority countries, but now we've expanded and we've grown, and we have a huge support system all over the globe, where we offer all sorts of supports. There's like mental health support, whether it's individual or group support. We've got a community, we've got a huge network of people that are able to help each other and support each other. So whether it's
Hmm.
needing, if you need an immigration lawyer or whatever it is that you need, we have meetups in like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and in America, like all over the world, where people that have gone through the program are meeting up with each other in real life and supporting others. So they have like this there's a ripple effect. It's kind of like a pay it forward. So once you've gone through the program, you have an opportunity to consider how can I continue to spread the light?
Yeah.
And so different people are doing different things, whether they are starting, philosophy groups in their university, or whether they're writing their book, or starting a podcast in Arabic or in Farsi or in Urdu or in Indonesian. So it's all sorts of different ways of reaching out there, spreading the light as much as you can. Now that we have been freed, we want to, extend our hand and free others. Um, we enjoy our freedom, we love our freedom, and we want other people to feel the
Hmm.
same joy and love.
What's the core of your faith now?
That's a really good question. I don't actually I'm not part of any organized religions.
Yeah.
Um, I am a spiritual person. I I don't have a particular faith that I abide by. I call myself an agnostic, probably more an agnostic atheist. I think the best way to describe it is I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what's going on and how we got here and why we're here and all that stuff. But I can tell you 100% for sure he didn't write the Quran. Like
Hmm.
that I know for sure.
Hmm.
Whatever this being was, that if there is a being that created us and is controlling us, it's
Hmm.
certainly not the Allah from the Quran. But I'm open to learning and growing and understanding
Well,
and
I mean faith not just in what you profess to believe or what systematized or historical you know belief structure you actually, but what's the core of your your belief, like your life, like what's the core of that now?
yeah, well, I think that, as I mentioned, obviously it's my making sure that my daughters are protected and supported,
Hmm.
um, and then also giving back to to everyone who I can empathize with, who I feel like what can I use my life for? Well, I can use all of my life experiences for making it easier for others who are going through similar situations.
Hmm.
I can support them on that very dark and isolating path.
Do are you is there anything coming up, like speaking tours or another book in the works, or maybe a movie based on your life?
There's a lot of different things in the works.
Yeah.
There is a documentary being made about my life. There is a Hulu episode that is probably going to be made
Hmm.
from a show called I Escaped a Cult. I'm involved in the Clarity Coalition, which is an organization of people from all over the world, different faiths, different ethnicities, different political backgrounds, different countries. We're all people who are concerned about Islamists and how they are basically pushing their tyrannical ideas into our media and into our government.
Hmm.
And so we're a coalition of people who support each other in our work, in our all of our individual works
Yeah.
to push back against this and to push for um, liberty,
Yeah.
um, Western civilization.
How do you parse or grok or understand photos of you know gay rights activists, pride activists marching hand in hand with Islamists? Like, how does that make any sense to you, and how do you make sense of that?
That makes zero sense. I mean, the whole reason why I even started becoming public with my activism, or one of the many reasons, was in 2016, there was the Women's March, if you remember that, in
Yeah,
DC.
the hats.
Yes, the hats, but they also had a hijab that was fashioned out of an American flag.
Okay.
So there was a woman with an American flag hijab on, and that was a huge poster in the Women's March.
Hmm.
And I remember at that moment feeling like that is the most absurd. Like you took the most known symbol of freedom and you fashioned it into the antithesis of freedom. Like it was so stupid and it made me so angry. I just had a migraine and I couldn't even function the rest of the day. Like I was just beyond.
Hmm.
And so when I see things now, like, gays for Gaza and, queers for Palestine or whatever, um, it's like I've become desensitized to the stupidity. There's
Yeah.
so much of it. It it's so jarring. Um, but really it's just pure ignorance is what it is. When I was in the UK, I saw a sticker that said, socialists for Palestine. And
Huh.
I was like, socialists? Like, they don't know anything. When they talk about like Israel being, colonial and like, do you understand what Islamists are? Do you understand anything about Hamas? Do you understand that they are the biggest colonizers? Like, that's why Iran is funding them, that this is the whole idea of a global caliphate. Like they have zero idea what they're
Hmm.
talking about. They have zero clue. They say Palestine is a feminist issue. A feminist issue? Like women in Gaza were treated like second-class citizens, are treated the way women are suffering under this war more than anybody else
Hmm.
because now under the fog of war, they're
Hmm.
they're having to overcome the most horrific situations. Like all of this is going to come to light, but it's like they have zero understanding of what it is that they are protecting or what it is that they are celebrating and supporting. Hamas, I don't know what to say. Like we all saw the videos. We all saw Shani Luke on that truck twisted and being spit on. And like we all know what they are, you know? And then if you can bring yourself to be the kind of person that's going to support that and say that that's resistance. Judith Butler was saying that Hamas and Hezbollah are leftist they're leftist groups.
Hmm.
If you're
Hmm.
going to take on terrorists
Yeah.
as your people, you know what I mean? Like how can you even begin to have a conversation with these people? These are the people that rip down photos of hostages taken by terrorists. You know, they're ripping down their posters. Like it boggles my mind. Like honestly, I'm telling you the truth. Even when I was a practicing Muslim, even when I was covered in niqab, even though my father is from Gaza, my blood is half from Gaza, I could have never ripped down the picture. I mean, there's babies. They rip down pictures of babies. I don't know. There is no humanity there. Like, where can you
Hmm.
begin the conversation? So, devoid of any kind of intellect, devoid of any kind of humanity, it's very much like when people say to me,
Hmm.
can you debate this Muslim scholar? No, I
Yeah.
absolutely will not. It's a complete waste of my time. I might as well debate this wall. It's a waste of
Hmm.
time. And it's
Hmm.
the exact same thing I see with this TikTok generation. It's like they're so indoctrinated that I don't even know.
Yeah.
where to begin. Like I'll just continue to
Yeah.
plant the seeds of light, spread them as much as I can,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
wherever they germinate and grow, they do. But I don't, it's like they are indoctrinated. Make no mistake, there is no doubt in my mind. It is a cult and they are indoctrinated and they are not thinking. They are just responding with the tropes like cyborgs, the same way I was. You've got your software of
Hmm.
things to say. Somebody says this, you respond with this. Somebody says this, you respond with this. There's no thinking involved. There's just responding with the proper, response, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
It's depressing. Um, but I'm actually really weirdly, because I'm a hopeless optimist, which is why I'm still alive today. I'm, I kind of feel weirdly grateful, at least, that people are aware. Because when I was writing my book and trying to get my book published, and every publisher was slamming the door in my face, they were unaware. They were in their ignorant bliss. And the same agents and the same publishers who slammed the door in my face sent me messages after October 7th and said, ah, I
Oh.
get it now. We see it now.
Hmm.
Yeah. And one of those agents was Neil Blair, J.K. Rowling's agent, sent me a message on October 8th and he said, I wish I had been able to get your book published. Now they see it. Now they get it. And so there's kind of a relief in me in a way that, like, at least we can see the danger. And when you can see the danger, then you can push back. But if you're unaware, then you're just a sitting duck.
Yeah. Yeah. Yasmine, thank you so much for your evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, pick your mind, maybe ask some difficult questions, which I like to do calmly. Where can people follow you, and
That
what are
was a
they going to
very calm.
find when they? No, I like the passion. I like the spark. It's really that's what
I'm
gets
Arab. I
the
can't help it. It's the
yeah.
blood. It's like a. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook. You can go to my podcast, Yasmin Mohammed Podcast
It's
on
doing very well.
YouTube.
Congratulations.
Thank
You do
you.
get
Thank you
some good
very much.
numbers. Yeah.
You can pick up my book, Unveiled. Um, you can look up my organization, Free Hearts, Free
Yeah.
Minds. I'm doing too many things, I think.
No, that's
I'm
all
all
going to be linked
over.
in the description. Can I ask you one more question about your decor? What does the A
hmm
stand for? There's a book, a
So it's
bookend.
it's A to Z is just like
Ah, okay.
the other book end.
Okay. It looked like all
It's not
something.
that
Like you're
deep.
some, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Never know. Never know.